Episode 11 with kayaking legend Doug Ammons. Welcome to The Art of Excellence, a show about people doing extraordinary things in their lives. I'm your host, Glenn Zweig. Thanks for joining me. My guest today is Doug Ammons. Doug is a scientific editor and researcher, a business owner, an accomplished author and filmmaker, and a classical guitarist. But what he's most known for is being an extreme kayaker. He's run several first ascents in the U.S. and overseas, and soloed multiple challenging Class 5 runs that most people would never touch, most famously the Grand Canyon of the Stikine. Because of his many incredible kayaking accomplishments, Outside Magazine has named him one of the 10 greatest adventurists over this last century. He has degrees in mathematics and physics and a PhD in psychology. Doug, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Well, thanks, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, you are certainly a study in contrast. You're this hardcore adventure athlete, navigating extremely dangerous, life-threatening rapids on the one hand, and yet this highly educated editor with double degrees in math and physics and a doctorate all at the same time. How do you reconcile these two different personas?
Oh, well, that's easy because to me, they aren't two personas. They're one and the same underlying thing. It's just manifested in several different areas. I mean, I think it's true that academics seldom are doers, and doers seldom are academic or intellectual types, but there's really no reason why they can't be one and the same. And to me, education is everything we learn. Book education or academia is just a small part of that. So I like taking what I've learned and making it into action, and likewise taking the actions that I've done and fusing them, interpreting them in other guises. So to me, there's not two different personas. It's just one, but there are many ways, many facets that the same underlying thing can come out.
And is this, I guess, duality, does this stem back to your childhood?
Well, undoubtedly it does, but I guess what I'd say is that, I originally got degrees because I come from an academic-related family and also a business family. But I got degrees in what I consider to be the core areas that would serve to help me understand everything. So physics for the physical world, psychology for the internal world and behavioral. But I basically almost got degrees in geology and spent 15 years in astrophysics doing research and so forth. And the athleticism, on the other hand, is, ultimately the way we physically move into these worlds and the thought processes by which we do that intelligently, the insight that we get from it, those are the psychological realm. See, so really all of this fits together in what I would consider to be an attempt to become fully human.
So of all of these adventure sports out there, you chose kayaking. This became your lifelong obsession. Why kayaking? What exactly is the appeal of it?
Well, I love water, for one thing. I think water is the ultimate metaphor. It contains all the moods, all the paces, all the movements that we feel within us are expressed in the river, and all the music. And so, to me, water is kind of this ultimate solute of our soul, kind of the ultimate aesthetic metaphor. By which, I found it was just a way that all my different experiences in all these different realms could come together into one kind of experience. It basically fused together the athleticism, the art, the music, the science. You can talk about hydrodynamics, or you could talk about the chordal structure of music unfolding. I mean, the river has all these characteristics. So to me, it's like this ultimate solute into which my life really was melded.
So when you were younger, did you try other activities, mountain climbing, rock climbing, surfing, and in this one, you felt the most passion, or did you just step in a kayak the first time and the rest is history?
Well, some of both. I mean, I've done a lot of different adventure sports. It's also a question that here in Western Montana, where I grew up, you've got rivers and you don't have an ocean. I mean, I love the ocean. Had I grown up on the ocean front in any place along the coast, I probably would have become a big wave surfer. And I do scuba dive, but I probably would have been a big wave surfer, I think, just because of the same dynamics. So some of it's where you grow up. But I have done all these things. I love climbing. I love getting up high. I spent a lot of time, less times technical climbing, but a lot of very dangerous scrambling up high because we have several mountain ranges close by. So I spent a lot of time in there as a teenager, early 20s. Rivers, I would say, moving water, just because the complexity of the medium, I think that's what drew me in. I came back to it as early 20s after doing it much younger. And specifically, I came back after just devoting myself fanatically to classical guitar. And in that case, when I came back to whitewater kayaking, I felt this immediate fusion of my experience in the water with the current pushing and pulling, and then the free running and the flow. And I felt it directly as music. I had a series of very complex musical dreams where I was paddling, but instead of just seeing the water move, I felt it as music. So I think the music helped me fuse the experience directly into kind of the athleticism and the power of flowing water. That was the key. And to me, they're one and the same. That's the way I experienced it.
And that feeling that you have, that allure of the water, that hit you the very first time, or did that happen over a period of years?
Well, I've always loved the water, and I always spent a lot of time in it. I was a competitive swimmer at a high level as well. And I mean, I paddled for not real hard and as a youngster, but not in whitewater boats. But when I came back after paddling just a little bit of whitewater, when I came back after I'd been playing my classical music for quite a while, that's when it hit me. And it's because there was this absolute fusion of the power and the complexity and the motion of the water with the music I loved. So, and I dreamed that. I had these dreams, elaborate, color-filled action dreams of flowing with the water, but feeling it all as music unfolding. So in that sense, when I came back to it in my early 20s, that's when it really hit me and it took off, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I just had to be on the water, whether it was, in the middle of the night or 20 below zero in the middle of the night. I just had to be out there. I just had to feel that.
So let's talk about this Grand Canyon of the Stikine. I mean, you've done a ton of solos, a ton of first descents. This is probably the most famous. It's in British Columbia. It's over 60 miles of Class 5 rapids. And it's widely known as the pinnacle of expedition kayaking. I guess one could call it the Mount Everest of kayaking. So for those of us who've never kayaked, never seen any films about it, help us understand what it's like. Describe the experience of running a Class 5 river.
Well, we should start actually with something a little easier, which is like just getting into a kayak on flat water.
Let's start there.
When people slip into a kayak, most people feel like they're constrained. Their legs are inside. They're bobbing around. They start to try to paddle, and most of the boats are built to turn, not to paddle straight. So they have a bit of a frustration, but I think also a bit of liberation as they bob around and move around on the surface of the water. Some people get that very, very quickly about how you move around on flat water, and they like it. It's an interesting thing. It's like as if you're levitating right above the water. I mean, it's beautiful interface and mirror images of the sky and clouds and so forth. So it's fun, and it's also on flat water. It's not threatening. Once you add current, things change because suddenly the current wants to pull you down along with it. This inevitable path from the mountains down to the sea, and it's very easy as long as you move with the current. The instant that you want to try to do something in your boat that's separate from the current, then you find just how powerful it is and how different it is. So we've gone from flat water to simple current. And some people are very frightened because they feel like they're being flushed away, moved away, and out of control. And so that's even in very, very simple rivers without even a rapid in sight, just moving water.
Now, hang on. But before we advance further from that, I've seen people in these beginner classes in still water, and they make them do these Eskimo rolls where you essentially, intentionally, have yourself, submersed in the water and do a 360 while you're entrapped in this kayak. But for someone who's got some intimidation of the water, that's a pretty scary thing. Does that come naturally to most people, or is that something that scares a lot out of the sport?
Well, the Eskimo roll is this essential skill that you need to get back upright. At some point, you're going to flip over, especially if you're in moving water, because the moving water does not behave like solid ground. And so you're going to flip upside down. And it's just like a kid being able to get back up on their feet and balance there. So the intimidating part is that people feel like they're trapped in the boat, or they can. They feel like suddenly they can't breathe. They're upside down in this very, very awkward position, and they have to learn a rather peculiar skill that has to do with how you sweep the paddle through the water and how you brace your knees and your hips off of that sweep. So yeah, some people find that very intimidating. Some people get it really quick. I was a longtime competitive swimmer from a very young age, so it didn't bother me to go upside down in the water, and it didn't bother me being in a boat. And I tried one sweep, and then I immediately realized how the paddle was exactly like my hands, and then I just did a roll. And so that's atypical, but some people just get it the first time, and I just got it because I think mostly because of my swimming background. For other people, it can be a struggle, but it's a totally essential skill, and actually anybody can learn it. The trick is to give people, very clear little step-by-step things so that they don't try to do this awkward skill all at once, because almost nobody can learn it that way. But it is an essential skill, just like balancing is. And what it releases you to do is that once you have a good roll, if you can flip upside down anytime you want, just pat and just roll right back up. And so it gives you all these different opportunities to experiment and to try, which is what you need to do. It's what every kid does. I mean, just watch a kid learning how to walk, much less anything else, learning how to ride a bike. I mean, you just have to have lots of experiments to understand what it takes to balance, what it takes to move. So it puts you back, I think, and I think this is something that people do get intimidated with too, is it puts them back in the pure beginner mode. And I think a lot of people, especially older people, are not used to not knowing how to move. I find it exciting. I deliberately every year learn a completely new skill, so I remember what it's like not to know how things work. But a lot of people, and sometimes very good athletes, get very frustrated and even scared when suddenly they're put in a situation where they're unfamiliar. And so this is part of just being open to the new, to having this beginner's mind, to not knowing what the answers are, to not knowing how to move, but having fun being in that situation to learn as a child would.
It's interesting. When I first went skiing, I don't know how old I was, but I was pretty young. And within 2-3 days of going to ski school, I was going down black diamonds. Now, mind you, I was not a good skier. I just didn't know any better. Didn't, I think, understand or appreciate that one can get hurt going down a black diamond. The next time I went was maybe 6 or 7 years later, and I should be even better and more confident, but suddenly I know more. And now I'm not going down the black diamonds. Now I'm backing up just to the blues. And so I almost wonder if being younger helps you. It's advantageous to not know what you don't know versus as we get older and we get more cautious, knowing dangers we could be putting ourselves into. Do you see that maybe younger folks take to this more readily?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a general, almost universality in learning. As people see, as life beats them up and you start to understand that you're not indestructible, well, then you do get more cautious. But when you're young, you feel like you can do anything. So I think the trick is that anybody can learn how to paddle, and they can do so in not a way that frightens them. I mean, if it frightens them, they can always step back a bit. There are always these graded levels. There's no reason ever to be frightened because it's a super obnoxious experience. I mean, it's a threatening, terrible thing. And I wouldn't have paddled if I felt threatened all the time. One wants to move with confidence and competence. So yes, younger usually is clueless, but also, I mean, there are these, I don't know, they're not really paradoxes. They're just characteristics. When you're young and you don't know the consequences, you're much more likely to just take chances without even realizing they're chances. But at the same time, that gives you an openness to things. And as long as you're not in a fatal situation or a terrible situation, usually it'll turn out okay. As an adult, you're much, much more cautious. You don't want to get hurt. Paddling is an interesting thing because the water does not behave like solid ground. For instance, in the water, you can't just grab something and hold on, or you can't just, grab it or push it away. Everything has to be done really as a scull or as a wing, some kind of wing-like motion, because water is a fluid and it's not a solid. So all the aspects about learning how to move have to be changed. And some people love that. I mean, I love that feeling of not knowing and experimenting and finding out. But if you're somebody who is fairly rigid and needs to hold on to a rock, needs to hold on to something solid, it can be extremely threatening.
And let's talk about the most threatening of all, which are, again, these Class 5 rapids. Most folks probably don't know what a Class 5 means. I don't know. So maybe we can start with, and I'm sure there's some subjectivity to it, but what defines a Class 5? And then how does Doug then navigate through a Class 5?
Okay. Well, so we started off very simple, and now what we're doing is we're jumping to the opposite end of the spectrum that assumes that you have a lot of experience and a lot of and an aptitude and a desire to be challenged. Okay, so we've just made that gigantic leap across the entire sport. So a Class 5 basically means it's a kind of a catch basin classification at the upper end of difficulty. It means things are not just difficult, they require expert level control, but also you can get injured or killed. It's sort of like a black diamond. If a black diamond, you could get injured or killed on it, maybe it would be a triple or quadruple black diamond. I mean, that's what you're talking about at Class 5 rapids in kayaking. So it assumes that you're going to get there and you're going to be able to have the skills that allow you to move through that environment safely.
Is it the size of the rapids, the speed of the rapids? Is it boulders and other obstacles? Like, what is it that defines that black diamond of the water, if you will?
All the above. It's just, you can have many, that's why I called it a catch basin, is you can have many different kinds of Class 5. A gigantic river that's sweeping you down and you can't get out of, but not necessarily gigantic rapids. You can have very steep boulder bed or sloping or rapids. There are many different kinds of hazards. And so you can have tiny little steep creeks that are solid Class 5 because they require you doing really tight lines around boulders and past siphons where if you get stuck in, you're going to get shoved underwater and wrapped around a boulder or a log. So the Stikine, for instance, is a very big water river that's quite steep, that's very steep for its size. and it's trapped down in a deep canyon with oftentimes with vertical walls. And so you have very limited chance to scout, very limited chances to portage, and some hairy, gigantic lines that require finesse as well as a certain amount of just balls, well, that's where I'm going. That's what I'm going to do. I'm opening up the door, I'm getting in, and I'm going. So many different kinds of Class 5. And the Stikine is one particular one because it's also very long and it's in a wilderness. So you have remoteness in addition to difficulty, in addition to potential injury or death in a very tight canyon. I mean, the people that have had to get out of there on their own have had to hike multiple days through the wilderness bushwhacking. And that's just getting out of the canyon too might easily be a big water or a big wall climb. The thing is that with big water like that, it requires a certain kind of relaxation as well as hyper awareness. So you can't be tense. If you're tense, you will make mistakes. Your reactions will not be there. So you have to be relaxed as well as just ready to not just put the pedal to the metal, but just instant. I mean, it's more like martial arts than it is, say, football or something. Football, you have these short little sprints and, very, very high collision stuff. But martial arts, you've got that, but also absolutely split-second reactions at every moment, depending. But the difference with martial arts is that you're dealing with a human opponent. And here you're not dealing with a human opponent. You're dealing with a natural force. You're dealing with a natural phenomenon that's not reacting to you, that doesn't care about you, that you're just flotsam on it. But it does require and has massive power. And in order for a human to move through it, requires a human do certain things at a certain rate and quickness in order to stay online and to stay upright and to move through it effectively.
So when you can't scout it, right, because there's not good vantage points, so you're doing a lot of this for the first time. There's a lot of athletes, other sports, skiing, running, mountain climbing, rock climbing, etc., where some of the mental prep is sort of going through that run, in your head. But when you haven't done it before and you can't even plan it out because you can't see the whole thing start to finish, then that's got to bring a whole other challenging element to this. You just have to be very reactive because you can't have in any way, mapped out what you're going to do, right?
Yeah, but almost always people do have a clear idea. Like, for instance, now if somebody's going to the Stikine, they've got literally 100 different videos they can look at of different rapids at different levels. And there's even a head cam guidebook, which I think is an abomination, mostly because the nature of actually being in there is to confront the unknown, both about yourself and about the place. So if you find out everything that's there to the limit of your knowledge, then you're actually shutting off several entire dimensions of what it would demand from you as a person. So you're going to learn that much less. You're that much more dependent on crutches. And if you're going to go in a place like that, you shouldn't need crutches. So that's my simple way of stating a philosophy. When we originally went in there was very, very little knowledge. You do try to scout the best you can. It's very unwise to head into something that you haven't scouted. When we were first running it, there were several places where we couldn't scout well, and we just had to ride on our intuition about how the rapids had been working out. You develop at any river a sense for how the water's moving and what the characteristics of the rapid are. And that's from the geology and whatnot. One problem with the Stikine is that the geology changes dramatically from place to place. It's a very complex geological entity, and so that just makes it that much harder. But in general, it's a really bad idea to not scout and go into something you don't know. That's a good way to get killed.
Well, you've used the plural we, but you seem to like to do these solo runs, and you've done a lot of them. A lot of people consider soloing extremely dangerous and ill-advised. And you yourself in your books have espoused the virtues of teamwork on the river, how important that is. So why is soloing so important to you?
Well, it's an aesthetic choice. It's a taboo in the sport still, not to paddle by yourself. And that's primarily for safety reasons. And I think it's a good rule of thumb. At certain times in certain places, it's possible to make other choices. So one of those choices is the aesthetics, because if you go in with a team, and I'm not including really just necessarily just really hard runs, but any run. If I go out to work out and I'm with somebody, it's a social experience, right? I'm talking to them, they're talking to me, and we're talking about, other things. But when you're there by yourself, even if it's just on a pond, much less on a river, the water is your partner. What you find over time, especially if it's a more difficult river or one that requires more of your attention, is that the inner dialogue of words changes to an inner dialogue of movement. That is, your whole persona has shifted from human civilized words and abstractions into direct physical motion. So you're in effect speaking the language of the river directly without any barrier between it. So and that's an aesthetic feeling. It puts you so close and so intimate into the river and into the things that are going on that there really is no dividing line between you and that place. And that is an aesthetic, and that is a desire that I have to heighten the beauty of the experience for me personally.
When you go soloing and you do these incredibly intense rivers, I'm guessing you put yourself in harm's way quite often. Are there one or two near-death experiences that are still very vivid in your mind?
Yes, but I'd like to have a disclaimer before that, which is that, of course, the very last thing that you want from any of this is to get injured or killed. What I'm looking for is a truly beautiful, even sublime or transcendent experience in a very complex, demanding place, a beautiful place, one with power that I can feel myself woven into. And so that's really the goal for me. Now, sometimes things don't work out, and sometimes there are accidents. And do you want an example?
Yes.
Yeah, this is sort of like whitewater porn, but yeah, it happens. South Fork of the Clearwater is a very, very great river, about maybe 2.5 hours from here. So at high water, has sections that are very, very difficult, including a section called Coyote Falls. And so I had started to paddle that quite a bit by myself. So one day, high water, I paddled all the hardest things, and I came to a rapid, midway down the whole run. I looked over my shoulder, and I could see everything. There were a couple of breaking waves in the middle, and so I just peeled out and went in. In the middle of the rapid, in a big wave, my bow slammed into something. The boat went scooting upright, and then it fell over backwards, and I got stuffed down and slammed on the bottom, and I just couldn't figure out what was going on because it was so bizarre. And then I found myself stuck between a submerged log, and the bottom, and it just happened just like that. And
so you're submerged at this point. You're upside down.
Yeah, I'm upside down. I'm at the bottom of the river. I'm stuffed underneath. So fortunately, I'm actually facing upstream, which means that my body, the current can pull my body out of the boat. If you're facing downstream, then you have the cockpit and everything else in the way, and you can. It's very sometimes, especially if the current's strong, which this was, you can't get out in a situation like that very frequently, or you break both knees trying to get out because your body just folds around. But fortunately, I was the other way, and after, who knows, maybe 10, 15 seconds, might have been longer, I was able to pry myself out, and I popped out. So then the boat popped out. Fortunately, it didn't wrap around the log, and I chased it down, so my swimming came in handy. And then after I gathered everything, I walked back up the road, and I was trying to, and I thought, well, there's the rapid. It's like, what the hell happened there? And I probably looked for 30, 40 seconds. Then I realized there was the end butt of a log sticking out on the opposite side of the river with water going over it. I realized that there was a big old growth ponderosa log that came completely across the river, was completely submerged, and it was what was forming the wave that I went into, and it's what I hit. And enough water was going underneath it that it sucked me underneath. It was impossible to see it if you'd gotten out to scout, which you never would have done in a rapid like that, because you could see seemingly everything. But even if you'd gotten out to scout, you wouldn't have seen it. So these kinds of things happen.
But hang on, when you're, I want to go back to you're pinned under the water. When you say 10 or 15 seconds, I mean, right now, under calm conditions, sitting at my desk, I can maybe hold my breath for 60 seconds. So you're down 10, 15, 20 seconds, whatever it is, under the water. I imagine cold water, pinned down. You mentioned before how you have to have a certain part of you that's very calm and very relaxed. Is it the same thing when you're underneath? I mean, in other words, you can't panic because panic makes you do things you shouldn't do. So you're very calm and relaxed, thinking it through. How do I get myself out of here? Well, I'm upstream, so I can do this, that. Or is there a moment of panic and, oh my gosh, I might not get out of this?
Well, I'm sure for a lot of people there are panic. I didn't panic in that situation. It was just suddenly shoved into this problem, and it's like I'm problem solving. I'm trying A, I'm trying B, I'm trying C, I'm shifting things around. So yeah, as somebody who panics in a situation like that probably just made it very likely that something terrible is going to happen. Sometimes you can't problem solve your way out of an issue or out of a situation, but I can only say what I do, which is what most. I mean, if you're capable of doing hard whitewater, you're probably in this mode or capable of doing this kind of problem solving spur of the moment in a really difficult situation. I mean, I think you're probably self-selected to do that, but certainly not everybody can. I don't know that I have ever panicked. I'm trying to think back, not to my recollection, but people will. I mean, typically they do. They just suddenly they're completely out and they're threatened like crazy, and you can understand. I mean, they just are. They're frantically flailing. But that's a good way to get killed.
And does an incident like that give you pause in the future? Does it add an element of fear when you go on the next run, or do you just brush yourself off and move on to the next thing and it's history?
I do believe that there are many people that do that, and I think that is an absurd and I think it's understandable as a denial of one's mortality. In what I do is I look very carefully and learn everything I can about it so that I can identify or transfer to any situation in the future that's likely to be like it. So I put it down in the data banks and also as a caution. Because one of the lessons of that situation is that you can be 100% correct, paddling extraordinarily well as anybody is on the planet at that time, and still not see something that can kill you. Okay, so that if that doesn't give you pause, then then the person is at a clinically pathological level of denial. Okay, and I don't intend to be that. My entire purpose in paddling is to have it enlighten me, to understand more about the world.
So when you would be doing a new run, a harder run, a solo run, would you experience some initial fear going into it? And you just go in despite the fear, you talk yourself through the fear rationally as you're doing now, or it's more like you don't even feel an element of, I guess, trepidation going into it?
Depends on your choice of words: trepidation, worry, anxiety, fear. I mean, to some degree, these are synonyms, and to some degree, they're different levels. And I mean, I think anytime you're faced with the unknown, I mean, there's the uncertainty does evoke, some worry, but also it evokes passion and challenge and interest and fascination. And so there's more going on than just fear or not fear. And no, I don't think it's really a bad idea to talk yourself out of fears, because fears are an honest thing that come out. And so you need to face what's causing that or what's provoking it. And if you can't face it honestly, it's the worst thing in the world to try to explain it away and keep going. So, I mean, so it's some kind of combination thereof. And, sometimes all of us can convince ourselves of going on in the face of things that turn out to be really stupid risks. And but I try not to do that.
Well, I mean, I've heard stage performers say that if you're not nervous, a singer, a dancer, an actor, if you're not nervous when you're about to go on stage, then you're not prepared. And that you should be a little bit nervous, and that's natural and that's normal, and that shows that you care and you're focused and you've done what you need to do. So it's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah, and so somebody looking at it from outside saying, "Oh, okay, this guy's about to put on a Class 5 plus or Class 6 river. I mean, he should be nervous." I just think that it's a balance between your confidence and your thoughtfulness, your planning, knowing that you've put in the time that makes it reasonable for you to make that step. I mean, that's one of the things that I object to most about the kind of the Red Bulling of adventure sports is because I don't think that, and this is true for many, many years, decades, what movie people want is to show these guys just defying everything and just going out and just doing it because they're so goddamn good and presenting the sports and the decisions in really unfortunate and stupid, stereotypic ways that are utterly false. So what you don't see, for instance, is the decades that the person has spent training and being in similar situations and making assessments and accomplishing them and paddling at a high level and training like crazy. You don't see that. So a normal person watching him says, "Oh, well, this dude, he just got in and he just ran this goddamn horrendous waterfall. Wow." Well, it's always more complex than that, and there's always a lot more going on than that. But it's just so wonderful for the Red Bull guys and Red Bulling of America that no, these guys are just sucking it up and just going for it, and they're tremendous, courageous heroes and whatnot. People just get the completely erroneous idea of what it takes to be in a place like that and to do it safely. And, frankly, a lot of the athletes love that because it just makes them much bigger of a hero and that much different than other people. My feeling is that anybody can learn any of this stuff. It depends on appetite, and it depends on an intelligent approach to stuff so that you don't take stupid risks. Life is difficult enough, and there are enough things out there that we can't control that you or I could die from cancer. I have a friend who's dying from cancer right now. There's enough going on that we don't have to gratuitously go out and risk our lives. In fact, I think it's incredibly stupid to do so. It's a tremendous waste.
Let me build on that a minute. You said in your book that there's got to be something you get out of the sport that justifies the danger. It can't just be about fun. Your quote, "Fun is not enough to die for." So what do you think it is you get from it that counterbalances that risk? If it's got to be more than just fun and enjoyment and pleasure, then what is that for you?
For me personally?
Yeah.
First is that what I started off with is that the paddling is this solute for everything I ever loved to do. And so I managed to weave together all the different aspects of my life, my art and poetry and music and the science and the aesthetics, the dance, the sheer movement through the beauty of the world. And so, I mean, it has a lot of different elements to me that are just tremendously, deeply satisfying to me as a person, and that they take place in certainly some of the most spectacular and beautiful places in the world, so that you actually get this level of intimacy with all these other dimensions in such a place. So for me, that's a big part of it. At some point, you weigh the different things that have happened to you and what you want to do and decide how you want to proceed. And at this point, I'm not paddling super hard things, and I don't really have any desire to either. There's still a number of things that it would be fun to do, but
you don't paddle because of the physicality of it, or because of the risk involved in your sort of de-risking at this stage of your life?
Yeah, well, I paddle, but I would like to go up to the Stikine again. I think I could handle it just fine if I prepared correctly. But I just don't have the fire that I used to have. And so, it's just a matter of practicality and to say that, well, if you're not going to prepare and you don't have the focused fire, then you shouldn't be there.
You've said that you have lost people. You've lost friends of yours, close friends on the river, close friends, mountain climbing, I believe, as well. Have you ever pondered why you're still here? Is it just luck? Is it better planning? Is it the way you navigate these waters that might be different? I mean, a lot of these people that have lost their lives, these weren't necessarily, these weren't amateurs going on Class 5 rivers. These were very experienced people that had done it for years and years and years. I assume had similar training and thoughtfulness that you have. So have you ever thought about that?
Well, all the time, yeah. It's certainly every death or injury, causes you to think even more. So, and I really think that that's a waste. I don't think there's anything in kayaking worth dying for. I mean, there are certain things in life that are worth dying for, but kayaking is not one of them.
But Doug, and I don't mean to interrupt, it's not really hitting the question straight on, which is the perspective you have, which I appreciate, is one that probably all of these, or a lot of these people may have shared. It's not worth dying for, and there's got to be all these other things. But they died, and you didn't. Do you think it's just about serendipity that you didn't hit some type of fatal accident on the river, or was there something unique and special about the way you approach the sport that you think has kept you alive all these years?
Well, to some degree, all of the things that you mentioned. I think it's abundantly been shown to me by the river that you can be completely right and paddling extremely well and still die. And I've been lucky in that sense that instead of dying, I've just been hurt badly and could recover. At the same time, I mean, the reason that I was able to get out of situations like that is because basically I could be hurt extremely badly and still paddle a Class 5 plus and keep my head and keep control. So, my preparation and my particular characteristics did help a number of times. I do think there's enough going on, and this is also a draw, by the way. There's enough going on out there that you can't predict everything. You can't control everything. And that's one specific reason why people are drawn into this. If you could do and control everything in your life, it would be extraordinarily boring. And I, for one, would try to find something else to do that would make it a little less predictable. I mean, that's why we like music, is because it's not utterly predictable. I mean, it's why we do games of all different sorts. I mean, it's a fundamental characteristic. I mean, watch any child. Watch a cat play, just about any young animal of any kind. The whole nature of play is like that. And you can have very serious play as well. So yeah, luck, but also huge preparation so that, even when things weren't lucky for me, I could still resurrect myself, as it were, within the really compromised, terrible situation. I mean, like not losing my head under that log. I've been just demolished on the river, just broken, but dislocated collarbone, separated shoulder, ripped muscles, crushed ribs, or not really crushed, but just separated and cracked ribs, and still been able to roll up and still be able to control, even though my one side of my body is completely paralyzed. And so if I was less physically capable, and if I was, my skills weren't so intact at the time that I couldn't adjust, well, yeah. But at the same time, there are these little things, like if I'd been 6 inches to the side and taken the rock shot on my head, I'd be dead. It would have knocked me out, and none of my preparation would have had anything to do with what happened afterwards. So it's impossible in any practical sense to get risk completely out of your life. And I think the thing to do is to accept it as part of reality and work with it.
So has all of this experience you've gained kayaking bled over into your business and personal life? Has it made you a better businessman, a better husband, a better father, a better person?
Well, I've tried to make it that way. I think that it could easily do the opposite, right? Like learn to take great risks and not really care and be hedonistic, I mean, those would all be huge negatives. And I do have friends that do act that way. And those are the lessons that they took over, that they would be hedonistic and selfish, and and so they can't ever get married, they can't ever have children, and they're just fine with that, right? Because they just like it. So it can go both ways. But I have tried very explicitly to take the things that I've learned from paddling and then apply them in the best possible light over time, into the rest of my life, because that's the whole purpose of doing them, is not just to have them be isolated as some interesting thing that's not connected, but to be fully human and to take each of the things that I do in each of the realms and have it inform and deepen my understanding and my enjoyment and my awareness of the world. So, so you want a specific example?
Yeah, maybe one or two, sure.
So I'm known for taking all these wild risks, so-called, doing really hard things. And so, but when I take my kids out, what I'm really focused on is safety, and because I know all the kinds of things that can happen. So on the one hand, I'm just hyper about safety, like out on the river. But on the other hand, I give them the opportunity, because one of the greatest things that you can learn in a boat is that you're your own captain. You make the decisions. You can decide where to go. And then you have certain consequences. And so there's this great dynamic there about learning how the unpredictable parts of the world can be assimilated and be part of your life, and that how you actually can understand them, and how they can be beautiful. So, that would be a very general thing.
So now that you've scaled back the kayaking, how do you fill that void? And I don't mean just how do you fill the time. I mean, how do you replace that rush, the excitement, the joy, the beauty, everything that goes into being on the river, as you've talked about? How do you fill that?
Well, I have a huge number of things. Walking with my wife is extremely satisfying. The awareness that I developed for this other thing in more difficult circumstances, came over kind of as a skill for, I guess I would call it a skill or a way of thinking that, I don't need a super hard river to focus myself and to feel intimate and be aware in these ways. And so this is something that I do all the time. I think I learned it first, most dramatically on these rivers. I realized I was doing it, and then I just made it into a very deliberate thing. So I can do it anytime. I can do it sitting out in the backyard. How are you aware? Are you aware of the clouds and the humidity and the bees? The honeybees that are moving through the apple tree, and you just go on and on and on, and all the different aspects of the beauty of what's around you. It's very easy to fill the things. As far as athleticism stuff, I love to snowboard. I learned how to snowboard about 5 years ago. I love it. I love going and powder in the trees, and I love the idea, the medium, figuring out analyzing the physics and the athleticism and the technique, and then going both directions, switch and regular, so that, and then learning the tricks. And I've got grandkids, so I don't lack for other things that are rich and rewarding. And as for rushes, I think excited rushes are way oversold, and they are primarily the bailiwick of people who are not skilled and are out over their heads and out of their element. But it depends on how you use the word rush. Excited, fun, seeing something beautiful. I get a rush out of seeing a sunset.
We will end on that note. Doug, this has been really enjoyable for me. I can't thank you enough for your time.
I appreciate the questions. They're interesting. I'm sure we'll have other discussions just on our own, too.
I hope it's not the last one. All right, bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. You can subscribe to the show at iTunes, Stitcher, and theartofexcellence.com. I've got one small favor to ask. If you like the show, please take a minute and leave us a review on iTunes. I would really appreciate that. I'll see you next time.